Okay, so Adele, why do you think it is that as practitioners that deal a lot in hormonal intricacies and concerns, why do we need to be aware of ADHD as a diagnosis and other neurodivergencies? Like, why do we have to bear this in mind when we're trying to work out a plan, do you think?
I think it's a really amazing question because there are layers to it. I think first and foremost, it's about having a really robust understanding of the different hormones, the impact they have on the different neurotransmitters.
Hmm.
Because obviously, we know of neurodivergent brains, neurotransmitters are an issue. No one can confirm exactly why that is. Do we detoxify them too quickly? Do we just not produce enough? But what we do know is the role the hormones play. So if you're working with a neurodivergent woman, you have to understand that interplay. So I think that's one layer to it. The other layer, I think we have such little research to support this. There's little dots of it. So it's sort of trying to be up to date with that if possible, but knowing that the way that the woman is going to show you might vary depending on her cycle, and that we know that ADHD women are at much greater risk of things like PMDD, postnatal depression, having a much more challenging um, perimenopause. We know that. We don't know why, but we know that. We also know that neurodivergent people are at much greater risk of type 2 diabetes. So we want to be having a look at what's happening with that insulin. We also know that their adrenals are much more likely to be exhausted or in a hyperstimulated state, particularly if they experience rejection sensitivity dysphoria alongside that, which is something that's much more common in women with ADHD. Also, we see this link with inflammation generally. So, really having a look at what's going on with histamine and gut dysbiosis. We know ADHD people are much more likely to have gut dysbiosis. So, again, seeing these links with inflammation. So, I think it's really acknowledging the little data that and research that we do have is really showing us that these are much more likely to be an issue in ADHD people. So, it's just acknowledging that and bringing that into any dialogue and assessments.
And could you possibly like give us a single example of something that could be missed or mishandled in the context of if somebody's dealing with a neurodivergent client and they're going through the regular steps that they might go through in creating a plan to nourish their hormones, is there something that we might miss, like a specific thing that people could just highlight to think about next time?
I mean, if you're being robust in all covering all of the hormones and looking at them within the context of the hormone hierarchy and what the liver's doing, generally we'd like to think that nothing's going to be in perspective.
Mm.
One thing that neurodivergent women tend to have more of a sensitivity to synthetic progestins,
Hmm.
and also possibly progesterone, but we haven't got any research on that. This is
Okay.
very anecdotal. It's being really mindful of that. Is that playing a role on any of the symptoms that are showing up? But I think so. In terms of actually looking at the hormone specifically, probably not. There's nothing that springs to mind, but I think it's more about the way in which how you work with a neurodivergent women. Some of the nuances there
Mm.
that feel maybe even jarring sometimes, or like, just a little bit different that I think are more important to bring in. Um, does that help?
Yeah,
Do you
and
want me to like detail with that?
no, that kind of leads me on to what the next question I was going to ask, which is how does it also influence, or should it influence, the structure and the support that we then give these clients? So, assuming that the way that information is going to be absorbed and then acted on might be slightly different, have you got any top tips of how we could be mindful or how we could best serve those individuals in executing?
Yeah, I love this. Because we love to know why. We want to know why we've got a symptom. So if you just get a consultation, you analyze it and say, there's your plan, get on with it, you're probably not going to get very good engagement because
Mhm.
it's very like, well, why am I doing this? I can't, and then we can't hook into it. We want to understand it. So providing that information and explaining why. Now, one of our traits very commonly is not being able to hold information for very long if we're not hyper interested in it. So it might be recording sessions so that they can go back and go, oh yeah, that's what that was. Or wait, not over notes, but like points to have something
Yeah.
like really notes to follow back to come back so they can reference it. Perhaps having handouts with links to different research or summaries of perhaps, like blood sugar. I've got a blood sugar handout, for example, that goes, so you've got something to guide. It's just about providing the information in a really interesting way as well. Because quite a lot of the time, if we're not interested in something, we've got the attention span of a gnat. So that's not personal at all. It's just the way that our brains are geared. I think another thing where practitioners can get frustrated is like when we've asked somebody to do something and they haven't done it. It's really frustrating, right? I've told you, I've explained this. Consistency is not our strength. So ADHDers tend to go in like a bull in a china shop. We're like, right, let's go. I'm going to clear cupboards. We're changing this. This is what's happening. 3 days later, are completely overwhelmed, in paralysis, and not making any of the changes. So that's something to really take into consideration. Saying, look, we're not going to do that. Okay, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this in a really sustainable way. Trust me to lead the way, because that is the tendency. And they will go, give me more, give me more, give me more. And that actually might not be the best thing. I think also very rarely do I meet ADHD woman who hasn't got a cupboard full of supplements that she doesn't touch. That we need to do it steps in things, because we sort of go, oh, that's amazing, that's going to be the thing. And then if it's out of sight, it's out of mind, it doesn't exist. If it's not in our line of vision, it basically doesn't exist. And if there's too many steps, so if you're looking at ingredients, and there's like a ton of stuff and different things, if you're not interested in cooking, it's just going to be too boring and not going to want to do it. So it's keeping it super simple, little techniques like saying keep them in a cupboard where we forget about them. So it's just really simple things like that, but not taking, if there isn't consistency, it's not a reflection of that woman's capability to be able to do it. She's just not found a way that's interesting enough, perhaps, to hook into doing it. So there's sort of key things that would come up for me. Lots of reminders about appointments, because with the best one in the world, I can wake up in the morning going, oh, I'm doing that today. And then I've got completely hyper-focused and distracted by something else, and suddenly get, that's happening now. So, there might need to be just a little bit of softness around that.
And I love this conversation because there's such an overlap here with, I'm always really fascinated, always talking to you about compliance. And obviously for completely different reasons, when I'm dealing with ladies with endometriosis, particularly if like fatigue and chronic pain are really crippling, there's a little overlap here in what we're saying about compliance and structure and being able to access, being able to retain, being able to perform, obviously for different reasons. But I just think that is so fascinating, the responsibility that we have to help our client to access rather than just throw it out and off you go, do it or don't do it. So this is very useful.
I think it's really just about meeting the woman where she is. I think so much as practitioners, we can come in with our agenda of what we want to cover in that session and what's important to us, and feel frustrated if that doesn't happen. But actually just really honouring where that woman is at. You might have to repeat the same thing 6 times over each time, but there will be a point in which for that woman, it lands in that particular way. And that's no reflection of the success or what's happening. It's just about saying, where are you at? You might find, if you're physically sitting with an ADHD woman, give her permission to unmask. If she needs to get up and look at things while she's talking to you, that can feel unnerving for a practitioner. Like, what's going on? Like, that's fine. She's quite happy doing that. Getting up and moving and talking and relaying is just how she communicates, or might be really emotionally dysregulated and saying, all of you is welcome. You don't have to mask when you're with me. Because if they're genuinely not feeling it, ADHD is great at sitting and masking and nodding, and their heads are somewhere else. So being able to sort of give permission to say, if you feel like your brain going off, just tell me, if you need to get up and move, if you need a drink, if you need to pause this, or, quite often in the middle of a session, an ADHD person should just disappear off the screen for me. I'm like, oh, where's she gone? And it's just because she's got distracted going somewhere else to do that and then comes back, and not putting the judgment on that. She's still fully engaged and listening, but she's just like, oh God, I've forgotten to get the chicken out of the fridge. Let me get that out while I think about it because I'll forget it later. It's hold that space that all of that is welcome, all is okay, and giving that permission, I think would be a really beautiful way to develop that trust in a relationship.
That's incredibly valuable, because I know that's something that I need to take on board a lot more. I'm quite a kind of, I don't know, I'm perhaps controlling in the way that I want to deliver sometimes, and that's a really, really beautiful reminder. So I want to pick your brain. Our final question is, can you think of one single, I always ask this question to all the practitioners, can you think of a single really valuable golden nugget, if you haven't already shared it, of course, that us as practitioners could take away for the next time we're dealing with a client who has ADHD or similar neurodivergence? What is going to be like the golden nugget that's going to help us and our client, do you think, the most possibly, or could do?
But I would have originally like really getting them to track their traits against their cycle. That would have been my kind of real practical tip. But I think actually, just as our conversation has unfolded, I think the most valuable thing you could give a neurodivergent woman is permission to unmask, giving her permission to be seen and not judged in however she wants to show up with you. I honestly think that is the best gift you could give her. And you will get that trust and value and engagement simply by doing that.
That's really, really valuable. And I've learned a lot from the conversation as well. Thank you so much, Adele.
Pleasure.